There you go. Good to go.
All right. So you may have wondered why we are staring blankly at the screen. We are waiting for the streaming to go live to YouTube. So thank you for joining us for episode 31 on indexing. I'm glad everyone could make it, and I'm really glad to be back. I thought taking a vacation would still allow me to work a little bit, but it was tricky in some of the places I went to, even getting internet access. So I'm really glad to be back.
The internet in London is terrible.
Yeah. Well, the in Romania is a bit more hit and miss. So how was my vacation for you guys?
Oh, it was awesome.
We did an episode in 28 minutes.
Oh, yeah. You get me out of the picture. They go much more smoothly. Awesome. Well, I'll just dive right in. So the big announcement you probably heard, Internet Marketing Gold, our new community website. It will be available in the App Store. We're in the final stages of getting approval. It's already in the Google Play Store. And of course, you can go to that URL and use it from your laptop or PC. And I highly recommend you go there. If you wanted to get into the Cora and Pop group, but you couldn't, you can now. And in addition to that, we have chat groups on testing, on general SEO. We have a lounge for just off-topic chit-chat. And we're going to be adding more and more and making it better and better. And I highly recommend you hop on now. And we're soon going to be adding other kinds of content, so you'll just have to check it out when we do it. But it's going to be a really cool place for getting awesome nuggets on SEO. Kyle, anything you want to add about IMG?
Sure. So we've only been up for a week, and I think when Clint and I talked about this last week, there are going to be bugs. It's the kind of thing that we're working out, and a lot of them we don't know until we get 500 people in. And you use a system and you realize it worked great with 2, but with 500 is another story. So if you see stuff, because the real concept here is that these rooms, this platform is your platform. It's something that we want everyone to take ownership of, to say, like, this is where I can share my ideas, I can get ideas, I can communicate with other like-minded people. If you see something, put it into the support dashboard. There's a little link in the left-hand side. Just click that. Put a screenshot in there, put a Loom video in, tell us what you see, and then that's the kind of stuff that we're working on right now.
Yeah, I did that this morning. The private messages indicator was telling me I had 5 messages, and I'd click it, and there'd only be 1. So, yeah, I hit the support button. I sent in a screenshot of it and got it onto the list. And the cool thing is when you go to the support button, there's a link to see what's currently being worked on. You can see all the things that other people found, and you can say, oh, somebody already found this issue, I can skip it.
Yeah, that one, that actually, what I think the bug there is that when somebody searches your name, it does the notification before they actually write. So if they don't actually write anything, it just notifies like, hey, but it was just a search for you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we got to fix that because it's so confusing. All right. Clint, what are your initial thoughts on IMG?
I like it. There's some usability stuff, but you guys have a nice reporting system in place. So, I think my biggest gripe is going into a chat and you're sent right to the end, like the most recent chat. So now you have to scroll and try to figure out where the last time you read. But for the most part, the platform is built nice. The segmentation of the chats is nice, and I'm looking forward to seeing that expand. And I think it's going to be real helpful at the end of the day.
What, that issue with the scrolling, that should be done, I think, in the next update. Right? Like, if it's not coming out like tomorrow, it'll be the next day. That one's been solved.
Nice.
So we're solving stuff every day.
And the cool thing too is you guys already thought ahead and started the app stuff. So like, I'm using the Android version. I know the Apple one, you guys are still fighting with them to get that approved, but it's nice knowing that I'm not tied to, if I want to, I can shut off the desktop version of it and play on the phone later if I want to or whatever. So
Yeah, I do that
Still
too.
get that same experience. You know what I mean? Because like everyone's tried the concept before, but the experience is different. And here you guys match that up pretty. Your devs did a really good job of making that as almost seamless, in my opinion. So,
Thank you. All right, so we'll move on to SEO this week. If you haven't heard about SEO this week, then welcome to our show. This is clearly the first time you've seen our show. So SEO this week is a great resource. Clint goes through all of the week's news articles on search marketing and SEO, goes and filters out all of the crap, gets it down to the 5 to 10 articles that are really the most important for the week. And he reviews each one of them. And then oftentimes he covers other topics too with the remainder of his time. So, Clint, what can people expect this week?
So this week we examine a comment from John Mueller stating that even if you don't do a 301 from a penalized domain to your new domain, that Google will still canonicalize and pass that penalty on, which that was pretty interesting and opens a lot of doors for negative stuff. And then we also look at a content generation tool that's pretty cool and is taking a lot of the content piece of link building and made that significantly easier. So hopefully you guys enjoy that too.
Yep. So I highly recommend you go subscribe to SEO this week. It's a huge time saver, especially if you find yourself pouring through all of the publications on SEO news articles and stuff. Clint will save you a ton of time. You can get that time back for other things that make you happier. So check that out. So today, I wanted to go over the components and phases of indexing. I kind of look at indexing a bit different than most people. Like you get into a chat group and people say, hey, is anyone else having a problem with indexing? And when I hear that, usually my brain says, well, what part? Is it the discovery part? Is it a crawl budget issue? Are you hitting a crawl limitation that is short-circuiting it? Are you having index retention issues? Is your expectation of number of results in the SERP representation falling? And so I wanted to kind of point these things out because I think when you get more granular with indexing, you can find out that, when people say, hey, is anyone else having a problem with indexing? And someone else says, no, it's working fine for me. One person might be talking about one phase, the other person's talking about another phase. They're apples and oranges. And so I wanted to shed some light on that and go over some of these concepts. Any initial thoughts, guys, before we dive in?
This is a constant thing in any SEO group where people are like, just what you said. Is anybody having an indexing? And like two are like, yes, and 4 people, no. And everyone's like, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And odds are they're probably both right. The person who says he's having a problem probably has a problem. And the person who says it's working, it's probably working. But they're probably talking about different aspects of indexing. So this first phase of indexing, I call discovery. And I'm making up these names because I can only describe what I see and experience. I know Google isn't using these and they'll say, we don't have any such phase. I'm just describing it from our end, the SEO end, about what I perceive to be a phase of indexing. And so discovery is how will Googlebot find your website? Are you going to request indexing in Google Search Console for each individual page? Are you going to submit an HTML sitemap for indexing instead to trigger a crawl, a limited crawl? Are you going to use a list sitemap or an XML sitemap through their sitemap capability in Google Search Console? Do you have access to the Google indexing API? Are you going to link to new pages from already indexed pages and let Google discover them organically? Or are you going to use third-party indexing services? So this is discovery. This is how does Google find out that there's a new page that it needs to visit? And sometimes we've seen in recent updates that Google will turn off things like requesting indexing. You can request and request and request and nothing happens. We typically see that around large updates involving Google Search Console.
That's the biggest sign that an update is coming, when indexing stops, for sure. Like that, you can just see that pattern happen like a month before. All of a sudden indexing gets funky, and then it's like kind of really sporadic, and then it just like shuts off completely. Then you know there's an update.
Yeah, and within this, I see aspects of it turning off. Like there's one update recently where people could request indexing on a single URL, and that single URL would appear in search, but it wouldn't crawl. The indexing for submitting a sitemap wouldn't work because Google would index the sitemap, but it wouldn't crawl the links on the sitemap because that part was disabled. And that was frustrating. That created a case where I would go in because I was submitting HTML sitemaps and say, oh my God, indexing isn't working. But then 5 other people would say, I just submitted URLs, it's working great. But it was another case of we were both right. They were submitting individual pages. Those individual pages would work. I was submitting things to be crawled, but crawling was offline. So the second phase I call crawl budget, which you've all heard of. And crawl budget was made famous by Matt Cutts when he was still running the show. And Matt Cutts in some video implied that crawl budget was roughly determined by your page rank. So the more page rank you have, the more budget you have. This is a weird notion because websites come in all shapes and sizes. You can have teeny tiny websites with absolutely massive page rank, and you can have absolutely massive websites with teeny tiny page rank. So I'm not sure how true that is, his initial claims, but it does make sense that if you have a brand new website and your crawl budget is a few hundred pages, throwing 1 million pages at Google would cause an indexing problem. So, I would wonder about crawl budget in particular if it's a relatively new website. What do you guys think about crawl budget in general?
I can see that on a larger site, that period of time where you're talking about the HTML sitemaps or sitemaps and you're having issues with crawl. At that time, we were trying to index a website with 1 million+ pages. So we definitely saw that. And it was a new domain. So you combine that, and it's like you have to build the trust of Google to get the Google bot to do more and more and more. And it took some time. So I think crawl budget exists. How do you measure it and how do you figure it out and determine for your particular domain? I haven't cracked that net.
Yeah, it's kind of hidden.
The other thing too I don't understand is like you'll often see like a consistent crawl budget, and then all of a sudden there'll be a spike and then drop, and I don't really ever understand when like all of a sudden your crawl budget is increased when you were pretty steady. Like Google's all of a sudden on your site. Like, is that a bad sign? Is that a good sign? Like all of a sudden they're looking for more stuff to index and rank? But I don't know. I don't really understand crawl budget all that well either.
Yeah, but it goes without saying that, you could be fine on discovery getting Google to, go and initially visit these pages, but you could potentially have a problem with crawl budget depending upon, how new your site is and how big it is. So that could be another area of, disconnect between people saying it's working and other people saying, no, it's not working. And then there are these things that I call crawl limits. And these are things that will trigger Googlebot to kind of give up on your website. And one of the common ones is when you use URL parameters in your navigation and it goes awry, and Google can, by doing permutations of those parameters, can get into infinite loops in your navigation. And then when it does that, what Google typically sees is that, by like doing permutations of your faceted navigation, it's gone through your sorts and filters on a category, never escapes the category because there's literally millions of combinations. And what they see is basically the same page over and over again for a million URLs. And they go, oh, this is all we're going to get. We just keep getting the same thing over and over again. Let's just give up on it. And when you go and look in Google Search Console, when this happens, you typically have very high counts of duplicate titles, duplicate meta descriptions, and your indexing, if you're using sitemaps, is extremely low. Like Google will index 5% of your website before it quits because it came across an infinite loop. But slow response times, if Google thinks it's becoming a denial of service, it'll eventually quit crawling. Too much duplicate content, it'll think it's in an infinite loop. If you're blocking pages or resources, Google will give up on those. Server errors, if you get 500 errors, that's very bad, and Google will eventually give up and de-index. Redirect limits, so if you're stacking too many daisy-chained redirects, that can cause issues, especially if you have dynamic systems that can layer redirects. And then slow render times, like if you have JavaScript APIs that dynamically query the navigation and your JavaScript is slow and you have these JSON calls to even get the data. And so those types of things can interfere with your crawl. And so any of these things could inadvertently cause your site to not get indexed. And so I call those crawl limits. Any thoughts on those types of things?
I see those a lot in client sites, particularly those that like e-commerce that leverage the search function. So those parameters get crawled, and you can watch Googlebot just go on and on and on and adding and finding different variations of that search function. And I think that's in the old Search Console, you could control that. In the new one, you can't. So that would probably be something that I add on here, why Googlebot would quit. Eventually, you just get tired of following those same strings over and over again.
Clint, when you said you can watch Googlebot, how can you watch Googlebot?
I see it in the logs. Now that I learned a little bit more about reading the logs from Ted. And then you can look inside of, you can use other tools too to simulate Googlebot as well. So like Sitebulb is really good. You can turn it on and have it crawl as Googlebot or Screaming Frog. And you can watch how those things get stuck in those loops. And you kind of assume that Google is getting stuck in those loops at the same time. So there's two ways to do it.
Yeah, I've seen e-commerce stores that weren't properly developed, and Googlebot would get in and discover the add to cart and remove from cart links. And you could watch Googlebot in the logs just going through the store, adding product to cart, remove product from cart, add product to cart. And that's another infinite loop because of that shopping cart. And Google would quit on the website without getting a complete index of the store.
Right, because it kept getting stuck in that, and it didn't see everything else. So,
yeah.
Hopefully, Google brings that parameters, being able to adjust those parameters like you could in the old version of Search Console. It's still there now. It's just a pain to get to it, and eventually, it's going away at some point.
Yeah. My understanding right now is still like 70% of the functionality in Google Search Console is in the old Google Search Console. So you still really need both. You need to check both for problems. And especially if you want to take action, you need both still. They claim that they're working on migrating it over, but that's going to be some big Search Console deployments when they do. So frequency is another thing. How often does Googlebot come back to check for updates? and just knowing which pages on your website are the most frequently visited and which ones aren't being revisited ever. Because if you want to organically index content, you'd want to add those links on your most frequently visited page. And that's how a lot of the indexing services work out there. People have pages that Googlebot is visiting, multiple times an hour for updates. They throw some temporary links on the page and your pages get indexed, and then they delete the links. So when you use a lot of those indexing services out there, they're making use of this frequency phase and indexing to get other pages indexed. But if you have no frequency, that's another reason why your updates might not be appearing. So you might have updates, but Googlebot, for whatever reason, just does not want to go back to your page. Have you ever had issues with Googlebot coming back?
That's the one I'm dealing with now on Digital Lear. That's really the test site, but I also do SEO This Week. And if I leave it alone and let Google and try to find the new episodes, for example, it'll take like a week or two to find and index the URL versus going in a search console and it'll pop right away. So that's something I'm trying to, get it to understand the frequency. You can come back once a week and you'll see a new URL versus what it is now. It's kind of static because I'm not blogging, I'm not doing a lot of content, and I think that certainly affects Googlebot. Is if it's coming back and it's not finding new stuff all the time, it's going to lower the amount of times it comes back until it's happy. So hopefully that made sense.
Makes sense. And then there are limitations in the search engine result pages. And, I've seen this vary over the years, and it even varies, from case to case currently. How many URLs can you get to appear for a single search term based on the domain? And so for all practical purposes, I call it 2. I know there are outlier cases where people see 3, 4, 5 search results for the same domain name, but I don't think that's very common, and I don't think that typically occurs in high competition keywords. And I know in the past, the people from Google mentioned that when you see the 3, 4, 5 in a row, that usually means that there are quality problems with everything ranking below it. Don't know how that comes into play. But if you have a lot of pages that are targeting the same search term, then your perception of indexing might be that they should all appear, but there are these SERP limitations that only let 1 or 2 typically appear. And so that's another place where somebody might say, oh, I have 5 pages about vegetarian tacos. How come they don't all appear? They're not all indexed. And those filters on the search engine result page might be at play.
And didn't Google just recently announce that they're going to really try to hard cap that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is an SEO This Week question, isn't it?
Yeah, I think Ted and I discussed it there when they announced that. I will say though that after they did it, there's still plenty of search results examples where it wasn't applied. So where did they hard cap it? Under what guidelines they did it? That's their big question out there.
Yeah, and they've been putting these kinds of limitations into play for years. It's the main reason why I advocate multiple domain names, is because you can get around these limitations by using multiple domain names. All right, and this slide is about the primary index allocation. So there's for years been chatter about the primary index and the supplemental index. In the primary index, when you type in a keyword without any special operators, if your website appears in those search results, that's what being in the primary index is. The supplemental index is if you have to use special operators to get your page to show up for that keyword, then you're in the database, but you're not showing up for just default queries in general. You're in the supplemental indexes. And so how many pages can appear for a keyword search is very important, because you might have a keyword like, let's search for Google, and Google will show you 600 search results for that search query today, but there are millions of pages that reference Google. So only 600 are in the primary index. You have to use special operators to get at the rest of the million results for it. So how many search results there are can affect your index being in the primary index. So if you have a keyword that there's only 40 results for, your ability to get indexed is much better than for a keyword like Google, where there are millions of pages, but only 600 can be in the primary index. So that primary index allocation is another issue. And of course, that SERP limitation before is at play as well. And then there's the total allocation, which is that total number of pages that Google is working with behind the scenes. So 42 million pages talk about Google, but only 600 can appear in the search results. And so that brings up other aspects that we've been experimenting with in the past, like does Google timeshare in the volatile middle to try to figure out which content performs best. And so we have theories along those lines that we test for, but when we're testing those, we're really playing with the primary index allocation and the total allocation and how that behaves. Any thoughts on the primary index? Too academic?
No thoughts whatsoever.
Okay, yeah. But
I have always thought, though, that there are several indexes. That there's like the index that has everything, and that would include pages that have been de-indexed, that Google has put on the naughty list. I mean, there's that. Then there's a filtering mechanism, and then there's a forward-facing index. And there might be several versions of that or stages of that forward-facing index, as Google filters out what it actually then wants to show. But at a minimum, there's a front and a back to indexing. There's all of it, and then there's the stuff that's being displayed.
Yeah, exactly. And I would wager that Google's caching strategy is working hand in hand with the primary index to make things very fast and cost effective.
A while back, I was playing with Google Alerts for clients' brands and specific URLs and stuff like that, and putting those into Google Alerts. And I started getting alerts for these pages for like those sites that scrape and then put information on. And what was interesting is that I found that those sites are de-indexed. They're not in the forward-facing index, and yet Google is giving me an alert on it, which means it's in another index. So it's in that fuller index. It's just not part of the display index.
Yeah, exactly. And then ultimately, index pages. How many of your website's pages appear in the primary index and how many don't? And that's very important information, because you want to know about your pages that don't appear in search, because you need to fix those. You need to address them. And one of my big gripes about rank trackers today, all of these phases in some form or another have metrics that you can pull and measure and report on. And these are the types of metrics I think you really need in a rank tracker. I mean, knowing that you're number 4 for, a page is pretty cool, but knowing that these other 18 pages aren't even in search is extremely important. And, nobody's tools do a good job of reporting on that. So if you're out there thinking about developing a next generation rank tracker, think about all these phases of indexing and how you could report on them, and you will have a gold mine of a tool.
Hey, Ted, didn't you make a rank tracker?
It's in progress, and keep in mind that I'm thinking about these things as I build it, because this is the type of thing that will really help you diagnose issues of what's going on. And then finally, retention. How do you keep your page from falling out of the index? And I think this is a really big problem right now. So I think when a lot of people currently talk about indexing was like during the past update, I think the main problem was discovery and crawling. But right now, when people talk about indexing problems, I think the majority are talking about retention. They got something indexed, it was great for a week, but then a month later, it's abysmal. And that's retention. It's that phase of how do we keep the content in that primary index? And there must be some sort of factors. Google must be making a determination on what's worthy of staying and what needs to be purged. And so there's a separate set of rules and factors in play for retention. And I think we need to do a lot more research and experimentation as to what those factors are. Any thoughts on retention? Do you guys battle this?
I more from the link building perspective. I'm kind of the going back to your two indexing. Like, as long as Google crawls and knows about my backlinks, and I'm happy with that. One of the viewers made a point: is do you think that being in the primary index, that backlink is now more valuable than one that was be in the supplementary index, kind of thing?
I think all the links are still in the link graph. I think Kyle's testing in the past had indicated that even deleted pages still pass juice, even punished pages still pass juice. So unless that is changed, I tend to think that a link is a link. As long as it's in the link graph, it'll count.
I think for sure. I think that's still there. That means what's interesting about that is that the forward-facing index isn't the same as what is used to pass PageRank, which is an interesting idea. You'd think that the ones that are in the forward-facing index are the ones that's a clear signal Google likes the page for whatever reason, and any links on there would be passed, but it seems that they're not. I would guess they're not set up for that, or there is some valid reason that they would want everything to pass. Maybe they need the votes so much in order to keep the system moving that they have to use the larger index.
Yeah, and so from these slides that I've shown you, you can start to see that indexing isn't just a simple thing where you can say, hey, is indexing working? You kind of got to get more specific to make sure you're asking about the right part of indexing, and is that part working for other people? So hopefully people, if you walk away with anything, walk away with that. Is the discovery part of indexing working? Are you guys having index retention issues? Are you guys having issues with crawl budget? Those are separate components of this overall larger system. And it probably is a system. We're probably dealing with multiple processes on Google's end that do these different things that have the net effect of what we all know and think of as indexing. Let's look at some cases where indexing goes awry. So here we have some SEO testing. So we have 10 websites that I'm testing, and we have controls and test cases. This first test, I'm looking at broken images because lately I've been testing, our errors, a ranking factor, and having broken images on your page is one type of many possible errors. And when I initially ran the test, I got very strong correlations that, yes, indeed, broken images hurt your rankings. And I got fairly decent indexing within a week. One site didn't index at all, and one was kind of poor. But I come back, 3 weeks later, and the indexing is abysmal. And I can see all the rankings just vanished from the test sites. And so this is a case where discovery was great, the initial indexing was great, but retention was the problem. So it's a demonstration of indexing in the retention phase being bad. Likewise, I tested broken links. So if you have broken links on the page, strong signal that hurts your rankings initially, but then ultimately had retention indexing issues. And because of that, I have to figure out what's causing that and retest, because I need to know that this factor is a factor over time, not just an anomaly for a week. And so, yeah, these retention issues are kind of messing up my error testing.
From our conversation yesterday, you showed I think it was the first set of slides, the first set of data yesterday, but I asked you, do you think the methodology that we're using, i.e. lorem ipsum, English ipsum, random character generation to create the content, do you think that's causing this drop in your indexing rate?
There are numerous things. Like when I switched from random Latin and random English, so we typically refer to those as lorem ipsum and English ipsum. When I switched from those to random alpha, where we just generate random words with random letters, my indexing got noticeably better, like measurably better. And I suspect that happened because of some sort of uniqueness score, and that those test pages were just like off the chart on uniqueness. And so that's my theory. So I think there's something about the uniqueness of the page. There's probably some other qualities of the page that you need in order to increase your retention. So maybe it's click-through rate, maybe it's something else.
You mentioned yesterday it could be that your page is actually too unique.
Yeah, if Google caught on to lorem ipsum and random alpha, they could say, well, if the uniqueness score is off the chart, then filter it, because there should be some duplication if it's English.
Huh. Could it be that there's two like bots? There's the discovery bot and then there's the retention bot. And the discovery bot's going, just looking at, is this unique? Yep, it's unique. Okay, we'll put it in. And then the retention bot is, does it make sense? Could that?
I'm fairly confident that is the case, because you can see here that on week 1, I get discovery and excellent indexing. I'm showing up in search with, 82% indexing, but 3 weeks later, I'm down to 30%. So I don't think it's the discovery process that's doing this. There is a separate process that is purging from the primary index to make room for other new content that performs better, draws in more ad revenue.
So how would you address that in your testing?
Well, yeah, that's the key. We got to figure out what helps and hurts retention and study that more. So I did
people talk about like freshness too, when they update their post date and they seem, or they feel that they get a bump or they see a bump. That could be part of the retention bot.
Yeah. That might simply be coming back into the primary index due to freshness.
Yeah, so like the those types of tricks are what we see as freshness, is just a different bot giving you a little more love, even for a short amount of time. Yeah,
and that might not even appear as a ranking boost. You might have been ranking 4 for a 250,000 search volume, and then you were no longer fresh, so you're ranking 4 for 25,000 search volume, and then you get fresh again and you just appear in more searches. So it's entirely possible that, that could just be whether or not you appear in search. This next test, no match headings, I found out that I was spoiling my tests, and I was like, how is this happening? How am I spoiling these tests? But in the tests, I had these headings that had random alpha keywords not the target test keyword, just gibberish in the headings. And those headings, even though they didn't contain the keyword, were actually spoiling the test result. And so this is the results of testing that spoilage by having no match headings. And week 1 is a strong spoiling factor, and week 3 it was a strong spoiling factor. But indexation went to shit, got cut in half over that time. But I find this really compelling because the factor was still a factor despite the indexation problem. So if your signal's strong enough, your factors still shine through. And then I verified that with keyword density. So the factor was still a factor despite the indexation problem. But yeah, it was still there, and it's affecting a lot of my tests across the board. So we have to figure it out. And so that's all I had. I want to briefly mention NFG Rockstars. So it's going to be an awesome show in early October, and I'm going to be speaking at it. Clint's going to be speaking at it, and who knows, maybe even Kyle will be speaking at
it. I'll check with Kyle's people.
Yeah. You should come check out the show and meet us in person, and let's talk shop over some Jack and Cokes or whatever you're drinking. And it's
kind of fun this year on the speakers. So last year, Ted and I, we both spoke at both, right? And I think we might have been the only people to do that. We were both at Rockstars and NFG, and we're kind of bridging that gap. And what's fun this year is you've got some of the Rockstar people that you might know. So in the NFG people you might know, but because of the two coming together, there are several new to both camps. So I think this will be a really fun conference. I think it's going to be a lot of good information. And you can see a lot of good people.
Yeah, it's going to be the event of the year content-wise for sure. And I was surprised to see that Cotton Grammar's on the list, so got a big name. It's kind of a small show, so I was surprised he was on the list.
Stephen Floyd's Bulletproof SEO. I think I watched that in 2013 maybe, and it was one of the best beginner SEO courses I've ever seen to this day. Very well structured. He's a good teacher. He's a good explainer. Broke it down in a way that if you're branded SEO, you can do it. And so I'm excited to see, 6 years out, I'm sure he's got some good stuff. And I'm sure he can teach it. And I'm sure he can explain it well, which is a real difference when you're going to a conference. There's some people that understand things extremely well, but cannot present them or cannot teach them. I don't think he's one of those guys. I think he can present extremely well. And so I'm excited to hear what he has to say.
Yeah, so check that out. Hope to see you there. Let's maybe go to the questions if we have any.
Lee added a couple monkey wrenches into the retention thing. Is one could authority be a factor in retention?
Possibly. I would guess that there are factors at play for retention. And so click-through rate could be one, backlinks could be one. If nobody's linking to these orphan pages, why should Google bother?
And he also mentioned traffic.
Yeah. I believe there are factors at play. And if we can identify those, and then maybe there's a whole new SEO industry. Submit your URLs to my service and I'll send retention factors to your page.
Could those also skew your test results though? So if you're testing on a high authority domain, wouldn't that mess with the results that you're looking for?
Yeah, that would blow up my world. But that only affects testing. If you had an actual website that had a lot of pages and you had retention issues, who cares if you have traffic going in for retention? You really don't care unless you're testing.
Yeah, but Ted, how are you supposed to scientifically prove that you're right?
I know, that's why I get terrible headaches and I have bad days. But we're working on it. We'll figure it out. We usually do.
Let's see. One from Craig Collins. I have a site moved a year ago. Old site is still indexed and new site indexed, but both HTTP and HTTPS. Far as I know, I have proper 301s in place. That's a common problem I see with a lot of people. They're switching those versions over or doing redirects, and Google is not showing the redirect. How do you guys handle that?
Well, whenever doing a migration, so I assume this is a new domain name.
The way it's written seems like a new domain name.
So when switching to a new domain name, you have to be really certain that you changed all of the URLs everywhere. You have to change all the URLs in the navigation. You have to change them in your sitemaps. You have to change them in your RSS feeds. You have to make sure they're correct in the canonical tags. You even want to change them in your advertising if you're doing pay-per-click. You need to go through your content management system, and any links that are in the post, you need to go on and update. Because anytime Google finds the old links and they're not handled properly, they go back into the index, and your old site and your new site compete. They duke it out, and oftentimes Google does the wrong thing. Mm-hmm. So you got to get super strict about getting all the URLs and all the canonicalization everywhere it might occur in your universe. That also includes your Google product feeds if you're e-commerce, your RSS if you're a syndicating blog. And then ultimately, if Google can't figure out what you need to do, you probably need to go dark, not host both. So only one website should have content and the other should just be redirects.
Or Ted, you could just own it, with your idea of 2 domains. So you've got your primary domain and trim down the one you really don't like that much. But just run it. When Google likes it, keep it, and then get 2 domains for the same keyword.
Make them different, split the content 50-50, start growing both, and have 2 page 1 results instead of 1.
I've also seen like where you're doing just internal 301s, like changing the URLs for a page from one name to another, and you want to change the URLs too, where that Google takes its sweet time recognizing that change in the indexing. Sometimes it's faster, sometimes it's slower, but really what I've just been doing is, if I'll notice it, if it's not hurting the ranking, I'll just leave it alone and let them figure it out whenever they want to get around to it, and I'll just resubmit in the Search Console once everything kind of calms down. So that's might be something where you don't have to worry. Google it's still ranking it, but it's still saying the old domain and stuff, and it'll catch up eventually. It's kind of one of those situations where I think you kind of have to wait out Google at that point, especially if you're doing everything right. If you're already doing the Google URL submits and all that other stuff, and all your your 301s are all in place properly and everything's set, and you're doing everything right, at some point you're just gonna have to wait Google out.
Yeah, and you might want to do the site change tool and Google Search Console. That might get you a little bit more expediency on Google's part. But again, if there's anything technically wrong, like if you're still showing the old URLs in the navigation or something, then that will obviously fail. But if you have everything else in order, it should hopefully work. Because the key dilemma with the 2 URLs is that the old ones have all the page rank and the new ones don't. So when Google says they're duplicate content of each other, it'll pick the higher page rank one to show in the search results, and it'll filter the lower duplicate. So the key thing you want to just make sure is that your canonicalization and your indexing and everywhere a URL exists is all the new domain URLs.
It also brings in, and it just popped in my head, is if Google's sticking with that old domain and the old URL, and you transferred it to a new one, but Google's not changing it, how far off was John Mueller when he said that Google's canonicalizing and remembering? And is that passing a penalty?
Yeah, and that's another reason to have doubts in those claims, which I have serious doubts about what John Mueller said.
Yeah. Interesting. And that's it for questions.
Yeah. If you want to find out about those serious doubts about what John Mueller said, check out SEO This Week. It's a great episode. All right. If there are no more questions, you guys have any?
There's a really good platform you can go to see that episode and all the archived episodes of SEO This Week.
Oh yeah, that's right. You can check them all out at IMG for free. You can create an account, log in, you get access to 4 chat groups, and you get access to a video archive of all of SEO Fight Club and SEO This Week, and all of that's for free. Costs you nothing. So thank you, everyone. We'll talk to you again next week, and we'll have more cool content and updates about the platform. Thanks a lot, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.